Thank you for participating in the 9th Annual Black Star Film Festival. We would like to thank our funders and individual donors, as well as our network of producing and community partners. This panel is presented in partnership with Creatively Speaking and Scribe Video Center. The runtime for this panel is 60 minutes. Please follow us on all social media platforms at Black Star Fest and use the hashtags BSFF20 and Blackstar20 SoLit. We hope you have a wonderful time during the 2020 Black Star Film Festival.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel. It's a very special conversation between Madeline Anderson, amazing filmmaker, Louis Massiah, and Michelle Materre. I'm Sean Peters, and I had the pleasure to briefly introduce this wonderful panel and conversation. I was at a retrospective in New York at DCTV a few months back, and I had a chance to watch two pieces by Miss Anderson that really blew my mind. And while I was watching it with my friend, film archivist Robin Margolis, I decided to text Maori and let her know that she had to contact Michelle to host a conversation with Miss Anderson. That's how blown away I was. So I want to introduce the panelists. Louis Massiah is an independent filmmaker who explores historical and political subjects. His work include W.B. Du Bois, a biography in 4 voices, a collaboration with Tony K. Bambara, Amiri Baraka, Wesley Brown, and Thulani Davis, Louis Alone, Thompson Patterson, in her own words, and the 5-screen video installation, The President's House, Freedom and Slavery in the Making of a New Nation. He is the producer-director of The Bombing of Osage Avenue and Power and A Nation of Law for the Eyes on the Prize 2 series, which I love. He was commissioned by Princeton University to direct Gifts, a portrait of Toni Morrison. He is a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and the recipient of the 1996 MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant Fellowship. So that's amazing. We are also joined by Michelle Materre, Associate Professor of Media Studies and Film and Director of the Media Management Graduate Program at the New School. In 1992, Ms. Materre co-founded KJM3 Entertainment Group, which directly managed the marketing, positioning, and distribution of over 33 films by filmmakers of African descent, including Daughters of the Dust, the highly acclaimed film by Julie Dash, as well as L'Homme sur le Quai, The Man with the Shore by Raoul Peck. Her critically acclaimed film series, Creatively Speaking, which I love, is now in its 25th year. Ms. Materre is a member of the board of directors of Women Make Movies and a former member of the board of directors of New York Women in Film and Television. And last but not least, the amazing, we are thrilled to have Madeline Anderson join us this afternoon. Ms. Anderson grew up in segregated Lancaster, Pennsylvania in the 1930s and 40s in the 7th Ward. Her life as an activist influenced her to make films about real people and the struggle for justice and equality. She is now 92 years old and has lived many, many lives. She has been cited as the first Black woman producer and director of a televised documentary film, and as the in-house producer and director of Sesame Street, which I grew up watching, and The Electric Company. Her work chronicling the history of the civil rights movement includes both Integration Report #1, which I had a chance to see, which is riveting, and I Am Somebody, which is a masterwork in 1970, which is housed in the National Register of the Library of Congress. Ms. Massiah, Ms. Materre, Mr. Massiah, Ms. Materre, and Ms. Anderson. Looking forward to hearing you.
Great.
Thank you, Sean. Great to see everybody.
So much,
Hi,
Sean.
Madeline. Hi, Louis.
Hi, greetings.
Hi. Hello.
So great to be here, Madeline. This is a little different format for us, huh?
Kicking and screaming, yes.
Well, better we could do it this way than not at all, right?
That's so right. Yes. I'm happy that we can do it this way.
Well,
Louis?
I'm honored I'm honored to be with both of you, and I have so many questions. I mean, Michelle, I feel like you're a kindred spirit in the sort of cultural struggle, and Ms. Anderson, I've learned so much from your work. I feel that you've been an angel on our shoulders, sort of guiding us forward. I of course, I'm nosy, and I have like I really want to know a little bit more about you. Dare I call you Madeline? How did your family get to Lancaster, and what was it like growing up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is just not so far from Philadelphia?
That's right. Well,
Yeah.
Philadelphia was always the big city to us, and we used to go down there when I was a teenager. A big excitement was to go to Philadelphia to the Penn relays,
Mm.
and that yes, and we would go down to Philadelphia like once a year to buy school clothes because they would have these big sales at Wanamaker's. I was born in uh, Culpeper, Virginia, but I grew up in Lancaster. My parents moved to Lancaster when I was 3 years old. Um, we, my parents had very little education, and my mother and father were young farm workers, and they came up during the migration of the 20s to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Um, Even though they weren't educated, they found work. My mother as a domestic, and my father as a stone quarry worker. And we were very poor when I was growing up. We lived in a segregated. All the black people lived in a segregated strip in Lancaster. It was called the Seventh Ward,
Mm.
and we were all crowded into the Seventh Ward. And we lived in the poorest part of the Seventh Ward. Um, as a matter of fact, we lived. Our housing was a strip of shacks, really, and that's where our home was when I was growing up until I was in junior high school. That's where we lived.
So when did you become when did you first conceive of yourself as a political person, and when did you first conceive of yourself as a creative person?
Well, I used to tag along to the movies I had with my older brother, and I started going to the movies when I was about 7. We never missed a Saturday at the kiddie shows. And I noticed, children are very smart. They can notice something. They can't put the name to it, but they know that something is wrong. And I noticed that our people were always depicted as lazy, ignorant, um, servants, and sidekicks. And and I saw savages in the Tarzan movies. And it wasn't until much later on, and I was ashamed of them, but it wasn't until much later on that I realized that these savages were kings and queens. That time, they were something that I wasn't proud to look at on the screen. And so at an early age, I got this idea that I would change those images and show the true dignity of people in the Black community. Because although we were poor, we weren't ignorant, and we were not happy-go-lucky people singing and dancing all the time. We were just people who were living and living the life that we had and finding positive, or not always negative, but positive spirits. And so I decided that I was going to do something about that. Now, it wasn't until I became an activist when I was 14. I started out making signs for the NAACP. And then one day when I was 14, I just jumped on the picket line, and that's how I became an activist. And then somewhere along the way, before I left high school, I put the two things together: activism and changing the image. And that's when I decided to become a filmmaker before I left high school.
Yeah, I think, Madeline, what you've been doing for your career has been what's inspired both Louis and myself in our careers and kept us going, because the work that you've done has been so monumental and has had such an impact on our community. And I thought that we should talk a little bit about something that's happening today, which because of you, we have contributions as well. And that is, we're celebrating the 100 years of the women's suffragette movement, and how far we've come along. How far we've gained, how much gain we've made as women, how much gains we've made as women of color, and especially in the media business. You've really been an inspiration to all of us, and what do you make of all this stuff, of where we are today? Sort of, combination of the Black Lives Matter movement and the continued women's movement, because it is continuing. How do you think things have changed, or have they?
Well, Black women have always been in the forefront. When I was growing up, there were the women that I knew about were mostly in the slave culture. But I told you I was an avid reader. I could read everything that I saw. My mother used to bring home newspapers and magazines from the homes of the people that she worked for. So I read everything that she brought home. I went to the library and read all the books in the children's section of the library. I read newspapers, and I knew what was going on in the world. I was always political, and to the dismay of some of my playmates who thought I was kind of boring, because I was always talking about, they used to always chastise me. Oh, what are you always talking about grown-up things? And they didn't want to hear it. But I was always earnest. And being earnest is not always attractive to your peers. But when I was growing up, the activists that I knew were Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and then in the 30s, Madeline Anderson, McLeod Bethune, and all of those old sisters in the way back time. And they were the women that I knew who were in movement and moving the struggle along. So Black women have always been in the struggle. We haven't always been given our credit for being in the forefront, because we were in the back room typing while the guys were fronting up front. But women have been always pushing the struggle along. And children. Let me mention children, because young Black children have always been in the movements. We were encouraged to be. The NAACP encouraged young people to get into the movement. They said, well, make signs. So when I was 9, I had very good penmanship, and I was making signs along with other kids. So I went from a sign maker to a person who was marching on the picket lines. And in Lancaster was like a southern town. There was discrimination. If we went downtown to shop, we could not go in the store. We could go in the 5 and 10, but we couldn't eat at the counter. So if we went downtown, we had to take a brown bag if we wanted to stay downtown at any amount of time. We had to take our lunch. Now we could go inside the shop, but we could not eat at the counter. So what I think today about young people, if you look at my films, you'll always see young people. And wow. I know that when Martin Luther King involved young people, children, he was sort of criticized for including young people. Do you remember that? Any of you, Louis?
Yeah, kind of. Yes. Definitely. But you know, it is so important that your work has always not only included young people, but also when I think about this extraordinary body of work that you did with Children's Television Workshop, that yes, millions, if not billions, of people have seen. You know, your films have influenced and really helped shape so many young people. I was actually interested in one thing. Michelle, when did you're somebody who has shared work and really used and really kind of given a wonderful platform to Black film. When do you become first aware of Madeleine Anderson's work? And yeah, what's your initial connection with Madeleine Anderson?
I think I first became aware of Madeleine when I was working with Bill Greaves, actually. And because of Madeleine's work with him, probably mid-'80s. Also when I was at Women Make Movies, you know, because Women Make Movies has always highlighted the work of women filmmakers. And so I was on staff in the mid-'80s there. And I started following Madeleine then. I think we did some programs way back then, even Madeleine, didn't we? In the 80s and 90s. We did. So right. we've been tag teaming along for a while here.
Right.
But yeah, I think Madeleine's work has always been so much a part of the work that we do at Creatively Speaking, trying to make sure, just like you spoke of earlier, Madeleine, that we get amplified, our voices get amplified, and a different kind of perspective, a different narrative for people of color gets seen more than the typical one that you witnessed as a child growing up in Lancaster. That's what we continue to strive to do with Creatively Speaking.
Wow. So I just want to follow in the story a little bit. So Madeleine, tell us, how do you get to New York, and how do you then become affiliated with really these kind of leaders and sort of this extraordinary, you know, cadre of documentary filmmakers like Shirley Clark and Ricky Leacock and Willard Van Dyke and Pearl Bowser? How does that all happen from Lancaster to New York?
Well, when I graduated from high school, I got a scholarship to Millersville State Teachers College. And I was only the second one to ever attend Millersville, Black person, to attend Millersville. That was in 1945.
Wow.
It was at the end of World War II, and young white male farm workers who had been in the service had seen the world, and some of them wanted to change their lives from being farmers to other professions. And so some of them attended Millersville State Teacher College. Now, they brought racism to the college, a heightened sense of it, because they'd been in the world, they'd been in the service, and their sense of worth had grown out of proportions, and there was white supremacy in their actions and activities. And they bullied me out of Millersville. They started with name calling and graduated to throwing spitballs and threatening. I told my father and my brothers about what I was going through. And I used to ride to Millersville, it was 3 miles from Lancaster. So I used to get the bus every day back and forth, commuting. My father decided to ride with me on the bus on several occasions, and so did one of my oldest brother. But as things heated up, I became afraid for them to do it because I didn't want to cause them to get into trouble and anybody to get hurt, because I didn't think it was a good idea. So I finished the year, but then I decided that I was not going to go back. I was going to get a job and work and save my money and come to New York. Now, things worked out that one of my mother's sisters lived in Brooklyn, New York. And when my uncle passed away, she came to Lancaster to the funeral. And I asked her if I could come to New York and live with her. My mother didn't want me to come, but my aunt said, "Oh yeah, let her come." So that's how I got to New York, and I got a partial scholarship to NYU. And so I continued my education at NYU. Now, my money, I thought I had a lot of money, but I really didn't. And it didn't last very long. And so I had one job. I always worked. I always had a job. From the age of 12, I had a job. My first job was working in the kitchen of one of my classmates, and $2 a week. And I spent $1 and saved $1. So I always had my own money. I just thought that was important, to have your own money. So one day, how I got to meet the Leacocks, I was looking for another job, and I looked on the students' billboard, and their job as a babysitter boarder. And it was Dr. Eleanor Leacock, Ricky Leacock's wife. So I interviewed for the job, and they hired me. Because being the oldest girl in the family, I knew how to take care of children. And now I got to meet Ricky and Happy Leacock, who they were not too much older than me at that time. I guess maybe they were 6 or 7, not even 10 years older than me. And so they became very supportive and excited about my idea of making a film. It was like serendipity. And I was not only working as their babysitter, but they were supporting me in my ambition to become a filmmaker. And so Ricky at that time was working in the field. He had already gained fame as the young person who was Bob Flaherty's cameraman for Louisiana Story. And when he would come home with dailies, he would invite me to come and look at the dailies with the crews. And I would, stay in the background, but I would look at some of the dailies. And I became very educated about filmmaking. And that's then what happened, I got married. And I moved away from the Leacock. Always stayed in my life until very, very, as a matter of fact, the first job I had was working with Leacock in his production company. He had set up this company to make films for MIT. Now, Louis, you know something about MIT.
Right.
And that was Andover Productions. I worked as a production manager in-house here, and that's where I met Pearl Bowser. Pearl Bowser was working as a secretary. And so Pearl and I were the staff for Andover Productions. Now,
Wow. No. And Pearl told me that she got a promotion to be the production manager when I guess when you became pregnant, maybe I don't remember which child, but she said that sort of gave her another position within the company. Then, yeah.
right. But I didn't take off because I was having. I didn't take off because I was having a baby. I started working on. I started working on Integration Report 1, and then Pearl took over as production manager, and that's how that happened. I was always pregnant and making films, and that was just another thing that I was doing.
So you how many children do you have?
I have children, and I have 5 grandchildren, and they are really the jewels in my crown. I want to say something about how I combine being a mother and a filmmaker and a wife, because much of my success is due to the support that my husband gave me. I mean, we both went to the mat for each other. He was trying to do something in his field, which was work, and he was going to school and working on his master's. And while I was trying to become a filmmaker and getting into the union, but he was my staunch supporter. And when I read about the book Lean In, we invented Lean In. I didn't write a book about it, but that's the kind of relationship we had. He would do anything to support me, and it was the other way around. I would do anything for him in what he was doing.
Madeline, could you talk a little bit about? I'd love to hear your story. I'm sorry. Could you talk a little bit about when you became part of the union? What that experience was like, and I always think that's a fascinating story, and our young women working in the industry today need to know this story.
Well, okay. I started out at the top as a producer, director of Integration Report 1. I used my salary that I got from Andover to finance that film. And So after I made Integration Report 1, I thought I was going to make Integration Report 2, 3, and 4. I was going to make a film every year about the progress that Black people were making in their struggle for freedom and equality. But it wasn't going to happen because of who I am. I went to all of the networks. I showed them Integration Report 1. I wrote proposals to foundations, and I did that for a year. But after that, I couldn't afford to do it anymore. I even took it around to high schools and colleges and New Jersey. New Jersey was as far as I could go because I didn't have enough money for traveling. But then I came to the realization that I wasn't going to produce another film, and I wanted to stay into the industry. So I decided that the way that I was going to stay in the industry was to get into one of the unions. And that was what I tried to do. Now, I finished making Integration Report 1 in 1960. While I was trying to get money to do Integration Report 2, Shirley Clark hired me to work as the script clerk for The Cool World. Shirley and I knew each other from filmmakers. Ricky was one of the filmmakers. The other filmmakers were Willard Van Dyke, D.A. Pennybaker, Shirley, and William Ferguson. He was from the Canadian Film Board.
Mm.
So there weren't any film schools at that time. Can you believe that? The way you learned to make a film was to work as an apprentice in one of the industries. So if you wanted to become an editor, you had to work as an apprentice in one of the unions, and that's how you got in. Well, those unions were closed to people of color because it was a catch-22. Your father had to be in the union, so you had to be the son, and daughters were not considered, even white daughters. You had to be the son of the father, and then you could get into the union. Well, imagine what trouble I had. But so I worked outside of the union. There was some work outside of the union, PSAs mostly, and from producers, people who were trying to become producers, white men. They would get these little contracts from the government, and so there was work. Most of the editors didn't want to be bothered with the PSAs. They were low-paying jobs, and conditions were not that great. But I worked outside of the union, and it was dangerous to do that because these guys didn't have any money. So we were always using other people's editing rooms, and we were always working at night. And so that wasn't very safe for a woman to be wandering around New York City at night. But that's what I did. And I honed my skills as an editor. I made money enough to contribute to the household. And then I went to work for Shirley. And I worked for Shirley. Now, working with Shirley, The Cool World, in order to get distribution, they had to have a union crew. So I was not in the union, and I was not able to get, but Shirley wanted me to do the continuity, and she wanted me to be her assistant. So I was her assistant, and assistant in every way that she wanted me to do, everything that she wanted me to do, working as her assistant editor with a wonderful African American male uh, editor, Hugh Robertson, and he was in the union, and he was able to get me an application to the union, because if it wouldn't have been for Hugh, I wouldn't have been able to get an application. So that after I got the application, then the requirements were you had to work in one place for a year and a half and then take the test, and then you could get into the union. Well, that was impossible, because anybody that works in the industry knows that you don't work on a project in one place for a year and a half. But I had Shirley and Hugh, Ricky, and friends of Ricky's got me jobs. And I worked, this is how I got into working for NET. I worked in production houses that had the contracts to PBS. And then, so I got to know all of the people at NET. I got to know the producers because I worked on their projects. And when I worked at NET for about 7 years, as starting as an assistant, and then I became an editor. And one of the executive producers, Al Perlmutter, was the first executive producer of the first Black journal. And then the young Black men who were working at PBS decided that they wanted to work for a Black executive producer, and that was
Bill Greaves.
well, at that time, no, they went out on strike because they wanted a Black executive producer, and it turned out that that's how Bill became the executive producer of Black Journal. Now, when Bill became the executive producer of Black Journal, I have been an editor at NET for about 7 years. And at that time, I was finishing up a project for Al Perlmutter. He was executive producer. And I said to him, you think I would like to work on Black Journal? Now, Bill didn't ask for me, because one of the things, one of the missions of Black Journal was to train young Black men to become part of the industry. And but so I had to ask to be to be a part of Black Journal. But when I get there, it's very friendly atmosphere. Everybody welcomed me, and Bill was glad to have me there.
Madeline, there's one part of your education that I think is actually really interesting. When we were talking earlier, you talked about how you would religiously go to these production houses and camera places whenever new equipment came out, and that was really part of your part of the way you learned the craft and the technology of filmmaking. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, when I was the in-house production manager, one of the things that I did was to order equipment and raw stock and everything, every element that went into filmmaking. So I got to know all of these men who worked in the production houses, F&B Seco, Camera Mart, and I was on the phone all the time talking to them, ordering raw stock equipment, and they did not know that I am a Black woman. And so, it's camaraderie. When you order things, you just talk and, hi, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. This is what I want to order today. And we always ordered large amounts of equipment, and because Ricky was working on a lot of projects at that time. His main project, though, was a series of science films for children and it was produced by MIT. So when I was started to make Integration Report 1, I was going on a shoot in the Monroe, and I was ordering this raw stop, and I knew I would be shooting a lot of people with dark skins, so I wanted a really fast film. So I was talking to my friend at FNBC Co. ordering this raw stock, and I said to him, what is the that I could get? And he said, well, he was telling me, and I said, well, what about this? And he said, oh, why don't you use 7224? I said, oh yeah, that's good. So he said, yeah, you could shoot a nigger in the wood pile with this, and you could see the wood, you could see what the wood was made of. And I thanked him. And when he came one day to deliver the raw stock, and he said, I'm looking for Madeline. Madeline, this is Bill. And I was looking at him, I was standing there. I said, oh, hi, Bill, I'm Madeline. And Bill could have died on the spot. And that was my greatest story. But, Pearl and I did a lot of work that we didn't get credit for. When Ricky was making Bernstein in Europe, Pearl and I were the production manager for that project. But the producer for that project was Robert Sawdeck, and his secretary had a big picture of her in the New York Times and a story about how she was managing this project. And it was not true. Pearl and I were managing the project. We saw that the raw stock was sent, the money was put in the bank. That was Pearl and me doing that, but we didn't get credit for it. So,
but I think that was sort of the way of the world then, right? I mean, you were doing a lot of things behind the scenes and not getting credit for it, right?
That's right. That's right. And as a matter of fact, when I tried to get into the union, one of their best editors for car commercials was a Black woman, Hortense Beveridge. She was a magnificent commercial editor for car commercials. And they tried to make her as an obstacle for me not getting in, because they already had one, so they didn't want another one to come in. So that made my effort to get in more difficult, because at that time there was a recession in New York, and everybody was protecting their territory, and they didn't want to share with people of color, and so the union became more urgent than ever to get into, because there wasn't that much work. So go ahead.
No. I was just thinking that your work is oftentimes, or I'm thinking in particular of I Am Somebody. Your work oftentimes is aligned with movement and aligned with political struggle, and as opposed to looking back, your work is very much in the moment and really kind of connected with really trying to move forward. How did you come to make I Am Somebody? And it actually has a Philadelphia resonance in that Henry Nicholas, who's in your film, is was the head of 1199C, longtime president of 1199C. But anyway, how did you come to make that film in South Carolina?
Well, when the strike began, Black Journal was moving on to a different executive producer. Bill was leaving the show, and Tony Brown was going to become the next executive producer. And his way of making of producing Black Journal would be quite different from Bill. Bill was very political, and Bill was a person who wasn't afraid to have opposition to what was going on in the media. He was outspoken. This is no criticism of Tony Brown, but his way of producing Black Journal was going to be quite different. And that was part of it. The other part of it, I felt now that I was ready again to jump into producing and directing, because I felt I'd earned that, and I was going to move on. So at the same time that Bill was leaving, most of the staff was also leaving. Everybody was going in different directions. And I heard about the strike before I left Black Journal, and I started doing some film research. And I went to, of course, again, going to the networks. They knew me by now, and I'd become quite a familiar face. And most of them knew me, and they had the same stock answer for the projects that I wanted to do, which had to do with activism in the Black community. And they would always say that there was no target audience for it. So that was not quite true, because some of the, and you could speak to this, Louis, some of the networks were doing some kind of publicity about what was going on in the Black community. They had, and they would show, bits and pieces of what was going on. The other excuse that the networks gave me for not wanting to do the film, to produce the film, was that they did not have an audience for it, but that they would also wasn't anything that had staying power of interest, which I was going to make more than one film, of course, about the strike, and I didn't get the money to do it. But somehow 1199 came to me. They knew I wanted to make the film. So Mo Foner, who was executive producer, executive director of 1199, phoned me and said they wanted to make the film. They made films. 1199 were in the business of making films as a as a tool for organizing. And they wanted me to make I Am Somebody as a tool for organizing hospital workers, not only in North Carolina, South Carolina, but nationwide. And that's how I got to make I Am Somebody.
Wow.
They gave me the money. They gave for once. For once, I had a budget that was gave me enough money. I produced a budget, and they accepted my budget, and I stayed within that budget, and I stayed within the time. As a matter of fact, I finished a little earlier because after 2 weeks after I finished the film, I had my fourth child. So I I had to finish the film before giving birth to my son, and I felt that I Am Somebody is my story. It's my story because they were dealing with race, gender, and politics. And that's what I had been dealing with all of my life in trying to get into the union and trying to make films as a Black female. So their story was my story, and bits and pieces of my story are in the film. When you see the mother with the stroller, that's me going down Fifth Avenue in the Women's March for Peace. So bits and pieces of my life are in I Am Somebody.
Wow.
Wow. I think I've heard you tell this story, and I could hear you tell it many times again, Madeline, because it's just such an incredible life story that you can share with us. And for those of us in the industry, like Louie and myself, working to make sure that we continue to have the kind of images that would make you proud, that we can continue to represent of our people, and to try and get this narrative out to as large an audience as possible, which is what we try to do with Creatively Speaking. I think that's what we look for from you and from Pearl, and we couldn't have done it without you.
Well,
And I couldn't have done without all of you.
We have a question from the audience.
Oh, yeah.
Miss Anderson, do you want to make a film memoir about your life? You want to make an autobiographical film memoir?
Yes, but this is what I always have big plans. This is what I thought I was going to do. I thought I was going to do my write my memoir and make a film from my memoir. But I'm 92. I haven't finished my memoir. So yes, I wouldn't be adverse to having a film made.
Great.
And I have
sometimes film can be your. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a film could be your memoir. The film itself could be your memoir.
Yes, but I'm not giving up on my memoir though.
Great. So can you talk about your work at Children's Television Workshop? Because in many ways, those films probably have had the most impact because so many of us have seen them in our lives. How did you start working at Children's Television Workshop, and what was your role? What was your work, and what was the period of time that you were there?
After I made I Am Somebody, as I said, I had my fourth child, and I showed it at a Flaherty film seminar. I was invited to come and show I Am Somebody, and when I was there, I met Edith Zornow. Edith Zornow was the executive producer for the Children's Television Workshop. And she told me about a problem that they were having at the workshop and asked me if I would be interested in coming and putting the technical aspects of the work of the film department, of the live filmmaking. They had women who were making films in-house, and they were having problems because they were very talented, but they were not technicians, and they did not know how to make the finished product. They knew how to get a crew, go out and shoot and edit, but then there's a lot that goes on after the finished product. It has to be the negative at that time. Negatives had to be matched, and you had to go to the studio because at that time the films were the films were taped into the and so you had to go from filmmaking to TV, and TV was the taping of it. Well, these women were not technicians, and I was because that was how I was trained. I was trained to be a technician as well as an artist. So she asked me to come supervise the filmmaking department. And I said I would if I could make films. And she said, well, if you find time to do it, yes. And of course, I found time. And so I made my films. If you look at my films, you can tell some of my films because in my films, I made films with newsreel footage. There's one particular film that I made with a basketball player, Walt Frazier, and the curriculum was to teach children how to read Hot Shot. So I used Walt Frazier's basketball skills, and when and I put in newsreel shots of Walt Frazier shooting, and when the ball went in, the kid said "hot shot," and that's how they learned the word "hot shot." So I put in little pieces of newsreels. So if you look at the body of work for the Children's Television Workshop, Sesame Street, and the Electric Company, you'll see little pieces of newsreel, and those are my films. So
and
at the time that go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was but you actually worked around in other countries for Children's Television Workshop. I know it's based in New York, but there was a fair amount of travel with
Yes. Well, the first film that I made a film in a series of films that CTW was doing at the time. And CTW is everywhere. So the first film that I made was in the Portuguese language. And then they sent me to the Middle East to make a film for that series. Sesame Street is everywhere. In the Middle East, they were teaching women and children how to use English as a second language. And I was the senior producer on that series. And we did Sesame Street. When I went to the Middle East, we made films in Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and Tanzania. So but I didn't travel to all those countries. I was in the base at Jordan. That was the base, and that's when all the products were brought to this center. And then I was the senior producer there, and we put the shows together there. So that's how I got to go to the Middle East and and those films were. There was a young African American woman named Lois Fortune, and she was the head of the. I was the senior producer, and Lois was the executive producer. And
Lois Tippy
Lou,
Fortune.
yes, she was. She was. I think her title was not executive producer. I was a senior producer. No, I think her title was executive producer. No, Lou. I forget Lou's name. He was. Everybody called him Dr. Lou. He's the one that traveled all over the world. The Sesame Street is everywhere. But Tippy was the executive producer of Sesame Street in the Middle East.
Can I just bring up something, one more point about I Am Somebody? I know we're talking about your travels now, but I just think I Am Somebody is such a monumental film for all filmmakers to know about, but particularly activist filmmakers. And there was something you said in our artist statement a while back that you were talking about how white feminists were talking about I Am Somebody, and said that it was not regarded as a feminist film. And you said, to me, the importance of the film was not its classification. However, it is a film made by a Black woman for and about Black women. At the time, my concern was, had I been successful in making a film that was true to their experience?
That's right.
How do you feel about that?
Well, when I was visibly pregnant, I went to a meeting. I was invited to come to a meeting of women who are feminists, and to talk about my work as a filmmaker. And I was criticized for, first of all, for having 4 children, because they thought that I was that showed a sort of a lack of interest in my work. And of course, I was kind of crushed by that. And then the first Women's Film Festival in the United States was in 1971. And I Am Somebody was shown there. And the film was criticized because Ralph Abernathy said in the film, "We are all going to stand as brothers, or we're going to perish as fools." And the criticism was that I permitted that to be in the film because it was denigrating the role of women. And I didn't accept that criticism. I thought that Black women, not only have to, we're discriminated in a number of ways, and it's not the feminist movement at that time did not understand how the oppression of Black women was intersected in so many different ways, not only as women of color, gender, also position in the communities. There were so many where Black women have to overcome, and that wasn't understood in the movement at that time. And I thought that some of the criticism that I received from and I think there was identification was, but they at the conclusion of the article on I Am Somebody, it was decided that it wasn't really a feminist film, and that didn't hurt me at all, because I didn't set out to make a feminist film. I set out to make the true experience of these women who were in the film. They were feminists, but that wasn't their main concern. Their main concern was for the right to be in a union, for wages, livable wages, and the main one was for respect, human dignity. And if you didn't understand that, then you didn't understand the film.
Too bad.
Wow. Boy.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Madeline.
Yeah, I feel so privileged to have to talk, to communicate with you on this. It's really been quite wonderful.
Well, thank you for your generosity.
Right.
Michelle. Yeah, I said to Michelle when I found out that she was going to be on the panel, do you ever get tired of talking about me?
And I said,
Michelle,
never.
I'm so appreciative of your honor for my work, both of you. And I hope we can get together again sometime.
Right, absolutely.
When we don't have to social distance.
And thank you, Black Star, for making this happen. So really quite wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Farah.
Thank you, Black Star. Thank you, Farah.
Right. Thanks, Farah.
Right.